Alrighty. Welcome everybody to the Tuesday night free split. This is kind of an introductory split to tell you more about what we do here at Esporter, get a good idea of what participating in a split would actually be like, and we're going to review some Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gates cards, deck archetypes, strong best strategies to start the format. Again, I am Michael. I am the CEO and co-founder of Esporter. Esporter is running video game rec leagues that include 4 weeks of coaching from pros, individualized replay reviews, in pod like drafts and group play opportunities and scrimmages, and all of that culminates into a championship tournament for prizes. So if you've never heard of us, check us out. Our website is esporter.win. If you're watching us on Twitch, you can do !Discord or !Esporter to get more information about what we are doing here. So we can talk more about that. If anyone has any questions, just let me know. And we can hop into a little bit more about what's going on with Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate. So if anyone has played it so far, the set actually does feel substantially different than AFR did, even though there is a lot of set overlap, even though, half the cards from AFR are actually in Horizons, Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate. There's a lot of interesting things that I've noticed. So I've done 5 or 6 drafts so far since the set came out on Thursday. And there's a lot of interesting things that now the data is showing, and things that I've seen in my own drafts. So let's get into it a little bit. If we have some time, it's going to be 30 minutes tonight. We're going to kind of go through the broad strokes of what makes some of the colors more powerful than others, what decks are particularly good when you're drafting, what to keep an eye out for. And we're going to kind of go through a lot of things that are kind of unique to this set, and some of the things that make it interesting. So yes, like I said, we're going to go through the commons, the uncommons, maybe some of the rares, and some of the colors that need some help with the rares. And we're going to kind of actually take them from what I think is the strongest to the weakest colors. All right, so first off, let's take a peek at how the 2 color archetypes are actually performing on 17 lands. So that, as you can see, the total sample size is pretty low. So the number of games played is the middle column. The number of games won is the farthest left column. And as you can see, I've put arrows towards the ones that are standing out as the best performing. And I think we see a little bit of a trend here, is that white is in a lot of them. So I think the general consensus for the format at large so far is that white is the strongest color. And part of that is because white is a very good aggressive color. You actually can't see it, but the mono white deck, it's, again, albeit a relatively small sample size, if you could find yourself in a mono white aggressive deck, it's actually got like a plus 65% or something win rate on 17 lands. So white plays well with itself. White plays well in aggressive decks. So we'll definitely take a look at all of these. We'll talk about the cards that are the best fits for these different archetypes. Black-red is alive and well. It actually is the highest performing 2-color and a splash color pairs, which is interesting. You would think it'd be one of the green ones with all this fixing that's floating around. Just again, this is all, take it with a grain of salt because it's all small sample sizes, but it's saying that black, red, and the splash, probably for some strong white cards, is performing particularly well. So black red has got like the sacrifice theme going on. You have all the same triggers that we had from AFR in Sepulchre Ghoul, in 2-mana second artifact or creature. We'll get to it later. We'll talk about the archetypes and the cards that go in them a little bit later. But green-white, instead of being like a life gain focused deck, it's a bit more of like a go wide, beat down, ramp into your big threats. That go wide strategy works really well with the Underseller Myconid. It works really well with the Steadfast Unicorn that pumps your team. So there's a lot in the green-white deck that is go wide, pump the team, ramp into big things, and then a little bit of supported by life gain. Trelasara, maybe she gets to a 4/4 or 5/5 over the course of the game. Repeated life gain is kind of hard to come by. If you can get a density of dragons, and you get the O2 that taps for green mana and gives you 2 life, that's one way to have repeatable life gain. Priests of Ancient Lore, but they always go very early. So it's more of a sub-theme than it is a main mechanic. But again, Celestia green-white aggressive has been pretty good. Black-white, kind of same story. Black has a bunch of good removal at common. So the Sewer Plague, the -2/-2 perpetually, and then -1 at each upkeep. You know, after a turn it's a -4/-4. After another turn it's -6/-6. So it's like it kills whatever you need dead, or it makes it, and it's perpetually. So even if it's in the graveyard, it's essentially a 0/0 and can never be brought back. So it's effectively exile. So Sewer Plague is like 3 mana, exile a creature, and I think it's right now actually not the highest up on like the 17 lands data of how good it is. Grim Bounty's higher than it. I actually would not be surprised if by the end of the format Sewer Plague winds up above it. And the last one is red-white. I think that is partly on the back of how strong the gold uncommon is. She's absolutely insane. The fact that you can give anything on the battlefield that you have double team for a turn is just so great. Double team is a really strong mechanic. It helps you from actually like not guessing out in the mid game. And one of the things that I've found in a lot of my games is Flood is real, and if you don't have any like on-board ways to spend all your additional mana, if you don't have any mana sinks, you wind up in a good amount of trouble if you kind of stall out late game. It's like card draw is not that abundant, and there's not very many onboard effects that you can pump. There's Specialize, and we'll talk about that later. But it's you know, a one-time use thing. So there are some mechanics to mitigate a mana flood, but there's not a lot to do with it once you get to the point where you're in the late game. Okay, so yeah, again, the actual hierarchy here is, you know, based on this, it's red-white, black-white, black-red, green-white. And we can kind of get into whether or not that is true. White is the best color. I think early data indicates that it is, and I actually think, based on how deep the roster of commons is, that it is actually incredibly powerful. So let's dive a little bit into it. So for anyone who's drafted the set so far, they've probably seen how ridiculous blessed Hippogriff is. And we're going to dive into this later. This is a point I think a lot of people haven't noticed, but this is something that I want to call out for anyone here in stream and anyone listening in Discord, is just the fact that there's like a real 4-drop problem in the set. There's a 4-drop problem, and there's not that many 3 attack 2 or 3 drops. So there's 2 things here. 4-drop slot is, there's not a lot of good 4s that you actually want to play. So the Blessed Hippogriff here fills a really critical piece of that curve that's not being addressed by any other cards in your deck. The fact that it blanks a removal spell, fills a critical piece in the curve that no other cards are really filling, like just combines to make a really, really strong card. Also, what's up, Andy? How's it going, man? Good to see you. Priest of Ancient Lore, obviously very good. It's, you know, worse than Inspiring Overseer, but the fact that it triggers all your life gain stuff and draws you cards, still super powerful. It's powerful in AFR. It's still powerful now. Patriarch's Humiliation, I think that's another one that everyone has kind of caught on to being strong. In the white decks, you are often going relatively wide. In white-red, you're going wide with all the double team. In white-green, you're going wide with Myconids and all the 1/1 tokens, and so you wind up with this, you know, hitting for 3 or 4, and worst case scenario, the losing all abilities is something that can just like negate the Linorm from having unable to be blocked by powers 3 or less, or to take flying off of a dragon so you can actually block it. So the Humiliation is actually just like a super strong removal spell at common, and I think can reasonably be taken very highly. Also, one that I was looking at and I was like, this feels strong, I wasn't really sure how strong it was the Flaming Fist Dustguard. This was a little bit surprising in the data, because I knew when I was drafting, I was like, this seems good. You know, a 3/1 for 2 is already a good rate, and then you get a boon that pumps something else. So I think the reason it's so good is because there are few 4 toughness things at 4 or under. So the things at 4 or under that have 4 toughness actually like block most things in combat. But the things that have 3 toughness really need something like this 2-drop trading up into the 3 and 4 drops that have 3 toughness is really good. So normally it trades up on a higher rate. If it's not trading up, it can trade down, of course, because it has 1 toughness. But if you just use it intelligently on blocks, you can get a good, valuable trade for you in a bunch of scenarios, and it leaves a little bit of value for you. So at common, there's just like a lot here that's pretty good. And the Steadfast Unicorn, this is one that T-Bone actually turned me on to early. I thought it was going to be a little bit too slow to be, and I was like, okay, you can only activate it during your turn. But the fact that it gets vigilance as well as +1/+1 is insane. You get to swing in with the whole team. Everything gets to stay up on blocks. And it's like, so you still get to apply this pressure and keep your defenses ready to go and fight back. And if you combine this, I know it's 4 mana, so you're not often going to be able to combine this with any tricks, but it's just one of those things that, like, once the board stays big enough, this is +1/+1 just winds up being super duper strong and hard to deal with. So these 5 are just these are commons, and they all have over, I'm pretty sure it's like over 57 and change, 58% win rates. So they're super good. Pick them highly. They will be great in your white decks. And then even tier 2, which we don't see for every color, is our serviceable commons. So Steadfast Paladin, that was an AFR, 2/2 lifelink, always a decent card in the format. I think it's good here. It activates a lot of the lifelink synergies. It's a nice little early road bump. You know, if you have to, you're fine trading it off. Same goes for Soldiers of the Watch. The double team is just like, hey, it's 2 cards in 1. If you can get the attack there, it's 2 cards in 1, and oftentimes you'll get it. You'll either get 2 damage or you'll get a trade early, because almost very few. I don't think any common 2-drops have 3 toughness, only the uncommons and rares. So it's oftentimes, if you're on the play, you get this down, you're going to be able to attack with it and get the other 2/1 out of it. Devoted Paladin. For the same reason the effect on the Steadfast Unicorn is good, the Devoted Paladin is also strong. You wind up going so wide in these white decks that all of a sudden, boom, this 1/1 to 4 or 5 guys and I get to push through is pretty devastating. So Devoted, and it's a good body. The 4/4 body in the format is just pretty nice. Valiant Farewell is, again, performing at like average to above average. I think it is fine. It is definitely not a bad trick. There is a fair amount of instant speed interaction in the format, which kind of punishes this type of card. So that's one thing that I've noticed a couple of times, is whenever I've gone to play a trick, because there's Dragonfires, because there's Sewer Plagues, because there's Band Togethers, like every color has instant speed interaction at common that can kind of screw you over. So I have actually not had a great time with some of these relatively impactful. You look at this and you're like, this is going to be good, but as soon as you get blown out with a removal spell, it's like, oh man, why did I play that? So if you compare this with the Hippogriff, there's a bunch of ways to make this work, so it can be good, but I think that I would, for the most part, like, not run a ton of them. Don't plan on running like 2 or 3 or 4 combat tricks. I would say maybe have like 1 or 2 to be safe. And often, if you see that your opponent has open mana, be wary. And one that's still performing fine, but definitely worse than it was in AFR, is You Hear Something on Watch. This was an awesome removal spell in AFR. I do think that it deals with a lot of threats in the format, so it's totally serviceable and a good, like a removal spell to include at common. But I think it's just, the 5 to an attacking creature, it's like it's only when they're actually putting it at risk in combat. I still think it's good. It just hasn't seemed to perform as well from the data and in my own experience. It's kind of been one of those things where I've been like, well, I guess I have to fire this off of their 2-mana creature, and I think maybe that's due to the fact that the format is relatively aggressive, so I'm not getting the opportunity to kill the 5 toughness thing that they paid 5 for, and I get all this value. So me having to fire it off fairly, like You Hear Something on Watch for their 2 or 3 mana creature, feels less good. And that could just be it. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, sorry. I think I meant to take those last 2 out because they were performing relatively average, and then talk about these uncommons. So these 2 uncommons are 2 that are like performing in the 60% win rate area. Alex Nikolich Corticals was talking about Sea Tower Imprisonment. It's essentially just I was gonna say Faith's Fetters, but I think there's another better and newer analog. It's like an arrest, but Yeah, I think Arrest also does the abilities. So it's Arrest, and then it gives you the Soldiers on the Watch, which is right above it, which is this guy. And then so it's essentially like a 3 cards in one, a removal spell, and you get 2 creatures out of it. A lot of value, really good. And then Rasad the Monk alone is good. Hey, it gets the creature off the battlefield. The Specialize is particularly expensive, but it does a lot of decent things in each of its colors. So both of these are high win rate uncommons in white, one to keep an eye out for, and definitely first pickable. Let's talk black, what I think is the second best color. So as we can see here, all of these cards reprints from AFR, which means, it's not great, but they were strong in AFR. Sepulchre Ghoul got a buff, so it's even stronger now. But interesting, Guildsworn Prowler, just awesome. Just a really good card. It's either going to trade 1-for-1 with one of your opponent's creatures, or it's going to, you can sacrifice it, get whatever sacrifice effect, and draw a card. So it's one of those things that's super strong. High pick, definitely keep an eye out for it. Vampire Spawn, good. Shambling Ghast, great target for all of the sacrifice stuff. Grim Bounty, just removal in this set is good and should be a high priority because a lot of the rares aren't necessarily like unbeatable. They just require removal. So it's one of those things where you want to be relatively smart about when you're firing things off because the removal seems to be snapped up quickly by people in pods, and it needs to be used on the impactful creatures. Yes, Grim Bounty's great. Sepulchre Ghoul's great. Sepulchre Ghoul is probably, I was going to say, is it only the only free sacrifice outlet? And it might be, but let's keep looking. I think it might be a common. It might be the only free sacrifice outlet. Deadly Dispute, another way to get rid of things. We have Skullport, Merchant. So all of those are back from AFR, and they are your outlets for that black-red sack deck to make that happen. But I also think it's just another good aggressive deck in general. Sewer Plague, like I said earlier, it's not actually in the stats better than Grim Bounty is right now, but I do think I've been like mega impressed with it, and I would not be surprised if it is better by the end of the format than Grim Bounty. So keep an eye on that one. It's messed me up a couple times. I've messed other people up with it. Armor of Shadows was one that surprised me. It's performing pretty well, but I actually haven't put it in my decks yet. And I think because, like I said, there's this abundance of removal in each color, and it's 1 mana, instant speed, kind of negate their removal spell and keep your bomb on the board. I think because there's so many massive creatures in this format, if you get to like dodge their removal spells, the Blessed Hippogriff, give Indestructible here, give Indestructible. 1 mana, give Indestructible is just good in this format. So I think that this is essentially like half of a Blessed Hippogriff, and that might be why it's so good. And I think just being able to keep your bombs on the battlefield for longer is what makes it so powerful. Viconia, 2 mana, 2/3. Hell yeah, I like that. Exile target card from a graveyard. That's also great because there's a bunch of graveyard shenanigans in the set. And the fact that when you flip her, you get back the creature you exiled from your opponent's graveyard and get to use it, it's really, really strong. So definitely first pickable, definitely a good pick. And then Ceravoc, I have not played with him yet, but he has an extremely high win rate. This creature specializes, seek a creature card, put it into your graveyard. Okay, so this is actually the already specialized into black version of him. So I may have accidentally nabbed the wrong one off of Scryfall. Let me actually take a quick peek of what the actual Ceravoc. So take a peek at what he does. Baseline. Baseline 3 for the beginning of each player's end step. If no permanents left the battlefield this turn, that player loses X life. If no permanents left the battlefield. Each player's. Wow, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, and you're oh no. Okay, here we go. Excuse me. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature control gets +X. Yes, I've played against this, where X is the number of creatures in your graveyard. Yeah, so in Black-Green Mill, in general, you're going to have a couple of creatures in your graveyard. This is going to be super strong. All of the double team things that conjure a duplicate all go to your graveyard. They're not tokens that disappear. So you're going to wind up getting, in any deck, a lot of creatures into your graveyard. So this winds up being great if you have Trample or if you have really anything to pump this up. And this is the black specialized version of this. So Ceravoc and Viconia, 2 uncommons to keep an eye out for. Both pretty good. Red. Let's keep cruising. So, I think based on black red and red white. Red is probably a little bit better because it pairs with the best decks more effectively, but I actually am not certain that it's better than green. I think it's white and black, and then red and green are close. I'm not exactly sure where, but let's talk about it. So Genocide Rabble Rouser, really strong. I actually had not been playing with this as much, or not been picking it as highly as I should have been, and then it messed me up a couple times where someone had 2 of them, and then all of a sudden they had 4 of them, and I was like, oh my god, pay 2 to pump the whole team? It was ridiculous. So this Genocide Rabble Rouser, really strong. Take it highly. It's performing really well in the red aggressive decks. Dragon's Fire, because there are anywhere from 0 to 7 power dragons in the set, the Dragon's Fire easily becomes like a hard removal spell for 2 at instant speed, so it's bomb. It becomes cast down like really easily. Hobgoblin Captain, obviously great. Was great in the last set, still good, pairs really well with the Battlecry Goblin. Valor Singer, also good, also performing pretty well. I think because the decks that red likes the most are the aggressive decks, it's actually doing a fairly good job of pushing a lot of damage and getting that extra power on something that is consequential. And then the one that surprised me was Earth Cult Elemental. I think it's because there's often, like in red, there's not a whole lot of things you can be ramping into that are really good. And people are going wide. There are other permanents between treasures and tokens that you can sacrifice. But yeah, I think it's just a good body. It's a good rate. It trades up with a bunch of the other 6/6 or 7/6 dragons, so it fights well with all the dragons. I think it's just a good thing to ramp into. It's kind of surprising to me to see the early data suggesting that this is particularly high up there. I actually wouldn't be surprised if it falls down a little bit over the course of the set. Let's talk about the uncommons, because for red, the reason why I don't think red's as good is because actually the commons fall off really quickly. At uncommon, Mephit's Enthusiasm is actually nuts. 4 damage target creature or planeswalker. If excess damage was dealt this way, note that damage, then you get a boon with when you cast your next creature. It gets that much additional power, whatever the excess damage was. So it's like 1 or 2 normally. So it's something that pumps up your future creatures. It's something that is just a good removal spell, nice, efficient. Think about like Lava Coil in Guilds of Ravnica. It was a 1 red removal spell that did 4 damage, and it's crazy. It's just a very good rate. Battlecry Goblin, definitely not as insane as it was in AFR. In AFR, there was just so many goblin shenanigans you could do with that 4 mana guy that made goblins when he came in, and like there's just it was really easy to make the Battlecry Goblin feel unfair. And here it's a little more fair, but still performing really well. And Ambergris, really, really good. I actually like the fact that it draws so deep into your deck every time it attacks, and in all these aggressive decks, these white red, the black red's a little more grindy, sometimes a little more combo based with the sacrifice stuff, but in white red it's gonna be more aggressive and you're gonna run out of cards quickly. So this is an awesome not only mana sink with the specialized, but a great way to refill your hand. And then the 2 highest performing rares that are just insane is Wrathful Red Dragon, 5/5 flyer for 5, and then it starts pinging stuff. It's like there's the other one that when cards enter the battlefield, it deals damage to any target. Yeah, I don't remember what that was called, but it feels like that. It's very, very strong. It's an absolute bomb first pick. And Tiefling Outcast, this card I have now seen in 2 drafts where I wasn't in red. This card was going very late, and there are enough Tieflings to make this a very strong card. Not only does it come in, make a buddy, so it comes in 2/2/1s that pump each other and become 3/1s, but Valor Singer's a tiefling. There's other ways to make devils. There's other cards that make devils. I haven't seen any imps. I'm not sure about demons. I know that there are ways to make like this tiefling deck that are pretty strong, and even it by itself is just good. So that's something to keep in mind. It's pretty insane if you can get it out early, especially if your opponent has, or you or your opponent have it on turn 1. All right, let's talk green. Underseller Myconid. I think everyone has sung this card's praises quite a bit. You know, it really punishes your opponent if they actually want to remove it. It winds up getting, 2/1/1s, even if they get rid of the mana dork. You still have, two 1/1s for 3, and then your opponent uses your removal spell on it. It's just so good. It's so good. It's definitely first pickable. It's a huge problem, and it helps ramp into not only bombs of other colors, but all of your 6, 7, 8 drops that you want to play in green. The Dread Lenorm, the fact that it's kind of easy to play around its 1/1, 2/1/1 counters and hexproof mode, but it's still nice. It's still nice, and if your opponent plays into it, it's something that can blow something out. If you know, you're just holding it up and planning to play the Lenorm next turn, you just get to pump something at the end of their turn and then play it out the next turn. The fact that creatures with power 3 or less can't block it is actually pretty big game. Normally, they're going to have to trade their big thing with it, and then you could potentially blow them out with a combat trick, or they're going to have to double block 2 big things. Hill Giant Herd Gorger does nice things for the life gain deck. You'd rather have the Dread Lenorm, in my opinion, just because the Dragon archetype is well supported in the set. There are green cards that match with it well, and life gain is a little bit less cared for, but it's still just a big body. It's like if you can't get the Dread Lenorms, the Hill Giant Herd Gorgers are great replacements. Owlbear, obviously super good. 4/4 trample, draw a card. Great, was great in AFR, still great. I think in a lot of these decks, if you find yourself in white green, you're like often leaning a little bit more aggressive. And one of the things that Ethan and Ben were talking about, the guys at Lords of Limited, was the idea that, oh, I can like accidentally take way too many creatures from my deck really easily. I noticed that in my most recent draft, I think I had like 19 creatures and 4 interaction spells. So although all of these cards, like some of the creatures are performing higher than removal, because it's the removal is relatively scarce and it's so good, it actually is something that you should take relatively early. I would take Grim Bounty early, I would take Sewer Plague early, I would take Dragon's Fire early, Humiliation early, the Uncommon Sea Tower enchantment. I would first pick a lot of those and then see what creatures kind of come to me, because I think there are a lot of creatures of comparable value. There's none that are like, there's few at common that are like, oh, this is so much better than the rest of them. And the removal is you really want to be able to deal with your opponent's threats. Band Together, great, works really well with the Underdark Basilisk or whatever. Any Death Touch works really well. It works really well with big things. So it pairs great in the format. Let's talk about the uncommons for a second. So this is why I actually think red is a little bit worse than green, even though green isn't part of the better winningest decks. Draconic Muralist is nuts. The fact that it's decent rate, 4 mana, 4/3, and then when it dies, you get to get whatever dragon you have. Granted, when I was doing this, I had a green-red deck, and I was going to get an Ancient Copper Dragon, and I got to go get the Ancient Copper Dragon like 3 times in a row. So I'm obviously a little biased because I had a ridiculous combo, but the Muralist is performing well. It's when it dies, draw a card, essentially choose the card you draw, which is great. And if you're building around it, it's pretty easy to plan a pretty strong plan around it. Jaheira Harper Emissary also performing extremely well. Hexproof from artifact and enchantments, and then when you specialize, it gets to naturalize something, so it kills an artifact or enchantment, or it does a couple other things. But again, so we didn't talk about this, but this is something that's come up in conversation a couple of times. The cheap specialize cards are the specialized cards that you should prioritize. And that's because you're able to land it, you're able to specialize it early for value, and it often is just something that allows you to do that and something else in turn. You don't have to take the whole turn just to specialize this creature. So Jaheira is great. Prosperous Innkeeper is great, works well. We know him from AFR, works great with the life gain mechanics. Druid of the Emerald Grove may look expensive, but honestly, if you get that anywhere from 10 to 20, it is a house. It'll ramp you like from 4 to 6 the next turn, guaranteed. It's just, well, guaranteed if you hit 10 or 20. But the fact that you have a lot of 7 and 8 drops that you want to play, this type of ramp is really good, especially if you're splashing. It's just like a crazy card in general. And then if, God forbid you have any way to blink it, all of a sudden that's like, oh my gosh, just thin your whole deck, get all the things out on the battlefield, and then have all the mana in the world to do whatever you want. Owlbear Shepherd, really, really strong, easy to make work. Herd Gorger, Herdgorger, Dreadlinorm. It's just really easy to get to 8 power or greater on the battlefield, and being able to draw an extra card every turn really puts the race in your favor very quickly. So one to keep an eye out for. It's actually not performing like way better than average, but I think in the right decks, in the right context, it can be good. I think in both the go wide and the go big decks for green, it's actually a pretty good card. And the 4 toughness is something I mentioned earlier, is at 2 and 3, there's literally almost nothing that can get past 4 toughness. So this body is just pretty good. Blue, poor Blue. Poor Blue, I didn't even have enough to to like fill up the first page with comments. Not enough that I really wanted to talk about. So right now, again, this is early days. Blue's not performing well. Blue is having, according to the data, Blue's having a really bad time. Yeah, I think there's just not a lot of cohesion in the deck. It's like Blue's kind of like a tempo-based blink, unblockable, like maybe dragons. It's kind of like it doesn't have an identity. Definitely doesn't have an identity that beats aggressive decks, and its controlling identity where it does the blink and bounce kind of thing. Green blue tempo can come together, and the Air Cult Elemental is great top end for that deck, but it's just like I don't really see this winding up being great. If you're one of the few blue drafters at your table, and you can get a bunch of the uncommons, you can get the juvenile mist dragons, you can get the sword coast serpents, all of a sudden, yeah, cool, that's a deck I want to be in. I actually found myself in a black green deck the other day splashing for the sword coast serpent because I had a couple of Pilgrim's Eyes, I had a couple of Understellar Myconids, and I was like, you know what, this is so good, I'm going to play it, and it wound up being great. I didn't have a problem casting it once, which is a nice thing in this format too. You can cast the 2 pipped bombs without a whole lot of trouble if you just put a little effort into it. But Blue's kind of hurting, not doing all that great. I would say I hate to say like steer away from it, because I think that a lot of some like green blue does seem like a viable archetype, getting some clever conjurers to ramp you out. Maybe played some undersimplifies, but I personally haven't had a ton of success with the blue decks, and it might have to take someone else to break it before I start bleeding gems trying to test out the archetypes that are having a little bit a few less success. So let's quickly go through the deck archetypes and talk about them. So there's 4 in tier 1, there are 3 in tier 2, and there are 3 in tier 3. So if you are in red-white, so red-white is double team, is Liara is insane. She's probably the best performing multicolor gold card that is like the signpost uncommon of all of them. She's probably the best one. Super duper strong. Really, really hard to when she gives something double strike and they get their best card on the battlefield back, like it's painful. So good card, good archetype. Boros is back, baby. Minthara, super duper strong, works really well with treasure tokens, works really well with any flicker effects. So Minthara is actually pretty good. The black-white archetype, also relatively aggressive. Really, really nice that it fills that 4-drop spot that we were saying. There's a 4-drop problem in the format where there's just not really good 4-drops to play. There's the Blessed Hippogriff, there's Grim Bounty, there's a couple of 4-drops in other colors. But when I even think about it, it's like, do I want to play an Inspiring Bard? Not really. Do I? That's actually part of the reason why I think that the uncommon 5/3 with Vigilance and attacks or blocks each turn if able is performing like at an extremely high rate. So if you're low on 4-drops, which I think we will find ourselves often in drafts, that's like a totally serviceable card. So keep that in mind. Minthara, really good. Black-white archetype, good. Black-red archetype, Treasure, Sack, Kalain, good, just like she was in the past. Definitely a solid deck archetype. Have the combo pieces, you have the sack outlets. Shambling Ghast is a absolute must in those decks. The 1/1 that has the undeath triggers. Just a lot of it's a strong deck, but it's no longer like the boogeyman of the format. Trelasara, she is good, still decent. This whole archetype I think is not necessarily life game, and as much as it is like go wide, benefit from white's really strong early aggression, and it like incidentally pairs with the green life gain cards. So now we're down to tier 2. So that was all tier 1. These 4: red, white, black, white, red, white, black, red, green, white. Those are the tier 1 decks that I think you should be keeping an eye out for. Tier 2. So this is in no particular order. This is green. Actually, I think it is in a particular order. Yeah, I think it's green, blue is the next one. So again, ramp and dragons, like this can work. Especially if you get that critical mass of dragons in your deck. All of a sudden, Corlessa is like, oh, okay, this is a good body, a good rate for a 1/4, and I get to cast all my dragons. Again, the ramp, the Underseller Myconids, the O2 that gains life, the Clever Conjurer. This deck can definitely come together, and there's a lot of dragons that you could be putting in this deck to get the most out of this card. So this one's fun. I think this one is worth playing and definitely a decently performing archetype. Black-green. Black-green's really, I think, about just like, hey, quality cards. We get a lot of removal. We get a lot of big things. We get to ramp. We get to play, effective, good cards, and I feel like that's what this archetype is. I haven't seen anyone really use the self-mill or the graveyard recursion all that effectively to be like, wow, that was insane. They really got the most out of the synergy here. I think black-green just benefits from the value of all of its just good cards. Blue-black unblockable. Also haven't run into this a whole bunch, but it also doesn't seem like it's performing particularly highly. One that I maybe wouldn't necessarily steer towards, and I think maybe that's because the blue cards, just the ones that care about on-hit effects, aren't that good. The 3/2 that draws a card on hits, there's just not a whole lot there. The double team, the 2/4 that attack, you get another 2/4 and scry 2. It's just like a lot of not so great cards in this archetype. Then unfortunately down to tier 3 we have OG and is that right? No, yes. Okay, OG. So the blink deck is fine. The best thing you can be blinking is like the Priest of Ancient Lore, which is, gain a life, draw a card. Blinking OG themselves is fine. Some of the uncommons you could be blinking as well. Air Cult Elemental is a good one to get the bounce effect back, but it's not. It's just one that hasn't really come together and doesn't really affect the board in the way that you want it to. It kind of takes too long to come together, and a lot of people are fighting over white. So to kind of get this to work, it's a tough one. If you get like a Displacer Kitten, if you get a couple like of rares that can kind of help juice up OG, and you get a bunch of the like that 4-drop, the 3/3 that blinks a warrior, and you just have a lot of good ETB effects, it can work. But I wouldn't necessarily hold your breath. It seems like it's just okay more than it is actively that good. Red green. I did have a pretty insane deck with this where I went 6-3 and I still didn't even think it was that good. I had Ancient Copper Dragon and the 8-mana Seek card and a bunch of ramp and good removal, and even going 6-3 I was like, oh, this was like not that great. I think it really suffered from not having deck velocity, so it couldn't really get through the deck all that well, just not performing all that well. But I think this is an archetype I like, unfortunately, and it's just not that good. And then the one that people have strayed away from or kind of staying away from the most is blue-red. Doesn't really seem like it's got a solid identity. I think it is probably potentially like the 2 worst colors in the format in blue and red. Not saying that red is bad. I think that these 2 colors don't play well together. So I would say if you're going out and doing a couple of your first drafts, maybe give some considerations to these 4 archetypes that are performing really well. You're going to be able to have some instant success if you listen to some of the pick stuff we were talking about today. And again, for anyone who doesn't know, my name's Quente. My name is Michael. I go by Quente. I'm the CEO of Esporter, and we run MTG Rec Leagues. For anyone interested, you can come and participate. You get 4 weeks of coaching from pros like Alex Corticals, Nicholas. We've had Lord Tupper, we've had Deathsy, we've had Semulin, we've had Sam Black. We've had amazing coaches come through and work with us. You can come sign up today. Check us out at esporter.win. You get individual replay reviews, you get weekly group scrimmages and in-pod drafts, and it all culminates in a championship tournament for prizes. So if you are interested in coming in, hanging out, learning about Magic, playing with us, we would love to have you. This is kind of what it's like on a weekly basis. A lot more interaction. You get to go even deeper into these things, and we kind of talk a lot more about how to get better at each set. Not just evaluating the current set, but how do you get better at Magic in general. So come find out more. Come work with us. Come talk to us. We're in the Discord if you want it, if you want to chat anymore. And I want to thank everyone for coming out. Good luck in all of your drafts. Use your Phantom Draft token and put what I talked about to good use, and then go bring it into the mean streets of Premier Draft and go take down all the sweaty tryhards like me. So good luck, everybody. Have a good time drafting, and thank you for coming and hanging out. I will see you all soon.